We are in the 7th decade of Smurf collectability, which means there are tons of fans out there, which means the prices of some of these Smurf figures can be way higher than you might think. But before we get into the top 10 most valuable figures based on sold comps, you got to know a little bit about this history, because the history will help you identify what it is you're looking at when you're out there in the field at garage sales, estate sales, or wherever you pick. It all started in Belgium by a comic book creator named Peyo. That's a pen name. His name is actually Pierre Culliford. They first appear in a weekly comic book magazine, Spirou, published by Dupuis, written by Peyo on October 23rd, 1958. They didn't have their own comic at the very beginning. They appeared inside of a medieval comic series named Johann and Peewit. You may remember those characters. There's even an interesting story behind the name Smurf. And it comes from Peyo himself. He's sitting at a table and he can't remember the word for something, so he makes up a nonsense placeholder, Strumpf. And essentially that becomes the French word for what we call Smurfs. I like to tell you some of this history because if you know and understand the history, it will help you when you're identifying certain Smurf figures out there. We're dealing mostly with figures today. We're not going to deal too much. There's all kinds of Smurf collectability. But for me, I find Smurfs fairly often out there when I'm hunting for things to resell that collectors might like. And it's 2 or 3 times a year I just came across a huge batch of them. And I've done pretty well. I paid $60 for a massive collection at a yard sale, at a garage sale actually. And these were in there. These ones were in there as well. And I kind of knew what I was looking at with some of them, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper to find the absolute most valuable ones. So I still have all of these for sale, and we've already sold $240 worth before we've even touched these, and I paid 60 bucks. Most of what we have left are pretty low dollar items, you know, somewhere between $4 and $10 a piece. But I'm telling you, I've sold some upwards of 40 bucks before, and I cannot wait to find the ones out there that you can get into the hundreds for. By 1959, the Smurfs have their own storylines in the comic series, in the weekly magazine. They are extremely popular, and the company clearly sees that these things can be highly collectible. They start producing their own figures as early as 1959. And quite honestly, these things were created to be collected. And it's obvious because they have been collected for decades and decades and have new iterations and new popularity, gain new fans and new collectors. So we're going to go through a list of the top 10, but we're not going to look at individual figures. We're going to look at tiers and which ones to look at in each category, and then get into the absolute most valuable figures by themselves. The Smurfs, unlike other popular franchises, become popular with immediate merchandising within a year, which is crazy for something that came out in the 1950s. You see a lot more of it now. So let me show you a little history. It'll help you when you're out there looking. Of course, you are familiar with the name Schleich if you've ever looked at the stamps on any of these figures. Schleich is a German toy company that became the dominant producer of Smurf figurines. When people talk about valuable Smurf PVC figures, they're almost always talking about Schleich era figures. Now, you will still see Schleich on a lot of those figures. We'll get into that a little bit later. The Smurfs coming to the US, because if you're like me in the 1980s, Saturday morning cartoons, that's when I became familiar with the Smurfs. The Smurfs were already a huge phenomenon in the 60s and into the 70s, but in the 70s everything changes because the Smurfs come to the US. And it's an entrepreneur by the name of Stuart Ross who acquires North American rights in the mid-1970s. Suddenly the Smurfs are a niche import and they have a mass market, and then you're going to see the cartoon come out. So it's not often that you see the collectability and the figures come before you see the cartoon. And that explosion comes in 1981 on the cartoons, and that series runs, I think, through 1989, almost a decade of the Smurf cartoon. And then another iteration in the 2000s, 2010s, and then even recently, you see the Smurfs movie, the Smurfs 2, Smurfs The Lost Village. And of course, everything along the way is merchandised, and what you're going to see is the new collectors wanting the older items, and you'll see the value of certain Smurfs go way up. So like just about anything, the amount of production in a certain era is going to really dictate how much these Smurf figures are worth. And we're going to look at that as we jump into our top 10 Smurf figures of all time. But before we do, I want to invite you to come and join us on dibdit.com. We're approaching 20,000 members who love the kind of things that we talk about on this channel. You can come over there and hang out, you can buy, you can sell, or just look at all the cool, awesome nostalgia. So don't forget, come on over and join us on dibdit.com, and maybe you can pick up one of these bags while you're at it. There's always a link below in these videos, and if you go over there, follow me. I'm Commonwealth Picker on that site, and you can use code Commonwealth and get $5 off any purchase of $10 or more. All right, number 10 are the most modern, most highly produced Jakks figures. They come out with play sets in 2009, 2011 movie, 2013 movie, and you can see these stamped on the bottom. They definitely look and feel a little bit different than the ones that I love to find out there. They're not worth a whole ton, but we'll show you a few comps up here, and you can buy and sell them in lots, and if you get them cheap enough, you should be able to do okay. Number 9 on the list, or I'm going to call them the fast food Smurfs. And these actually, believe it or not, if you can find them in full sets, can bring some decent money. I think 2011, 2017 to correspond with the movies. You see McDonald's and Burger King both running these. And if you find a lot of them, they might be worth buying and selling. Individually, it's probably not worth your time. If you're a collector, you can find them out there. I've found them many times. Number 8, and here's where it gets interesting to me. You are going to see some Smurfs tied to different sports. Generically, you know, even American football. But the ones you want to look for are the ones that are tied to specific teams. You know, there's soccer out there, and most of those are generic. You even have cricket, a generic cricket one. The specific ones can be in rugby, tied to specific events and tours. There are 3 that I find in my research that stand out. The Welsh have one, South Africa rugby team, and then New Zealand. And those are, I think, black and red ones. You find those jerseys, definitely take a look. Now, I'll be honest, you likely won't find these very much in the United States, but if you're watching from somewhere else, these can be worth, you know, $30 to $250, depending on what kind of condition they're in and what team they're associated with. Number 8, we're going to throw in an entire tier here, category for the Schleich 1980s figures. We're going to talk about a couple different things to look for, but the ones with unusual jobs or just jobs in general, I have sold ones that are associated with teachers and dentists, as a police officer. The cross collectability of the Smurf with the occupation can really help the value. It's not crazy money, but you can get decent money, and you can find these all the time. Side note, you are going to see stamps on these things most of the time on the bottom of the foot. Certain ones are going to be on the arm, the back of the arm, and you'll find them there. But don't get confused by these. Schleich is the major manufacturer here. You do see Applause come into the mix. It'll usually say Barry, WM Barry, and Applause is a subsidiary of that. The demand was so high that the German toy company couldn't keep up with it, and you're going to start to see Barry come in and make sure that there is enough supply for the demand out there. Here is an example. We'll throw a few on the screen. This one is going to... The bases are important too. There's variations in bases and colors that can add value. But this one right here says W. Barry Company. This one does not say Applause. Made in Hong Kong. Usually early 1980s. We'll throw number 6 in here as well, and you will find these often. And a lot of times they are tied not necessarily to a profession, but to something that people love to do. You'll see windsurfers, you know, you'll see, here's a little action figure of a superhero. This guy's on a horse right here. You'll see those types, and those can bring decent money. Here's a snorkeler. Some have multiple piece setups, and those you should grab. There's carts out there. Not huge money, but in perfect condition in this era. You should be able to sell them and make a little bit of money. You just have to be careful how much you're paying for them. Likely, you will want to find them in lots and maybe even sell them in lots. Number 5 is a category that I have done very well on, and they're very easy to identify out there. They're historical figures. I just sold, for instance, a Paul Revere figure, and those can go for good money. So if you see in the American era here, people that are tied to history and it's a Smurf, I would pick it up. People like Benjamin Franklin or George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, those can go for good money. Definitely, if you see a box and they're asking too much for them and you can't buy them in a lot, if you see those figures, they are worth picking up individually and paying up a little for. Number 4, and admittedly, you may not be able to find a ton of these in the United States, but don't underestimate the fact that there are Smurf collectors in the United States that know about these and have got them over time. So you might very well find something like this someday if you're looking at a huge collection of Smurfs. And it's from a West German company, Bully, B-U-L-L-Y, I believe. And some of these come in some very odd poses and look a little bit different. They also have the same variants as you see in the United States from this company, but they're printed differently and the production is slightly different and it can increase the value. We'll try to give you a couple examples here on the screen. On to number 3, and this might be a good place to interject a few little stories to help you understand the context so you're out there grabbing some stuff. These are some of the chase ones, these variants that have an interesting story or create low production for certain reasons. There's one out there that is pretty controversial. It's the Black Smurf. And it stems from a story where an insect bites one of the Smurfs and he turns black and angry, and it creates this zombie apocalypse, essentially, where they're going around biting other Smurfs. But the Black Smurf, if you can find it, now this one's heavily faked, so you got to watch it out there because people will take other ones and paint it and sell it. But this Smurf can be worth pretty darn good money. And I've seen comps all over the place from $50 to like $400 for these. I don't know enough about it to tell you what to look for when you're looking at fakes, so you should do your research on it. But I want to talk about some other variants here too. A lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this because I was familiarized with Smurfs in the 1980s. Gargamel was not an original character at all. Gargamel comes in later. And I have sold certain Gargamels for pretty good money, especially if they're attached to Azrael. And there's one variant, I think, of Azrael out there in that era that goes for like $25 to $30 by itself. And I missed it one time and I sold it in a lot, which was a mistake, but that's okay. So don't ignore Gargamel, because some of the Gargamels, like I said, with Azrael can go for good money. But if you see a set with Gargamel in it, you know it's not going to be in this top 2 or top first tier at all. You can find them certainly in the 1980s. You find them often. Azrael has a pretty good following on his own. I think it comes from, when you choose a name not like Azrael, if you don't know anything about Near Eastern religions, Islam and Judaism both have Azrael as like the angel of death. A little bit different in both. Doesn't really appear in Christian culture. However, in the Apocrypha, you do see the same kind of message. So Azrael as the angel of death is a perfect little companion for Gargamel. In addition to this, and there's some lore around this as well, where they say that Peyo himself was a bit of a misogynist and didn't like female characters, and there's a whole storyline that goes along with that. So you see Smurfette, but Smurfette wasn't actually a Smurf until Papa Smurf made her a Smurf. She was an invention of Gargamel. And so, of course, you're going to find certain ones out there that are Smurfette that can bring some good money. And even the more modern ones, I think there's probably 5 or 6 different figures that appear, female figures, in the Smurf lore, if you will. But most of them are more recent. And so Smurfette's the only female one you'll find back then. This really has nothing to do with our list. I just find it interesting and can help me piece together things when I'm out there looking at stuff. Smurfs aren't born, for instance. Like I said, Smurfette was created by Gargamel. The storks are supposed to bring all the Smurfs. There are, Papa Smurf, but then there's a grandfather Smurf as well. And I don't know when that story is introduced into the rest of the story. What do they call him? Grandpa Smurf? I can't remember. There's also a older female Smurf that you see. So if you see these rare variants out there like that, they're worth picking up. They're not necessarily huge money, but they're interesting because they're different than the rest. To tie up number 3, before we head to number 2, this Nap Smurf, this black angry Smurf, it never really makes its way to the United States. The 1950s were a far different time than the 1980s. So when it comes over, it's purple. But I'm not aware of any purple, like Peyo, Schleich figurines that are purple. I do know that Funko created a purple Smurf, a nap Smurf, and I believe there's a black one that they have as well. And Funko is a totally different animal and not these kind of figures, but you can find some Funko Pops out there that are Smurf branded that are worth a decent amount of money. Number 2 is those earliest Schleich. When Schleich starts making these PVC figures, they are obviously going to be highly collectible, but they're hard to find because they're old, but they're not impossible to find. And you have different ones out there: normal Smurf, gold Smurf, convict, prisoner Smurf. Let's see what else we can find in here. Drummer, angry, moon, winter, brainy, guitar, and Papa Smurf. And a lot of them are reproduced exactly like they were back then, but they're stamped differently. So you have to know your stamps, you have to know your age and the slight variations. So you got to have a little bit of knowledge. So I'm going to highly suggest that you look at a couple of websites here. Do I have them up? All right, I had to look them up here. Let's see, where is it? BlueBuddies.com. This was very helpful. And if I was at all thinking that I had some of these very early Schleich ones, I would definitely go on there and do my research. The other one is blueimps.com, and they can help as well, because these figures, like I said, come out later, and they're essentially reproductions of that first series. First series done by Schleich, for instance. This particular style of Papa Smurf, I think this is from 1989, made in Hong Kong. You know, you're going to find West Germany stamped on these things. You've got to look, I'm trying to think, these are probably identical, probably produced in the exact same year. But there's little different ways you can figure it out. Of course, the stamp is going to tell you the most, and you'll have to look some of that stuff up on these websites. And before we get to number 1, that little part about the convict Smurf, it reminded me of something that is definitely worth mentioning here. You're going to see, even in later years, these sets come out, and they're not individual figures, but they have a theme. Like there's the Halloween themed Smurfs, and I'm not sure what year that comes out, but if you see those themed ones in groups, definitely pick them up. Be well worth your money. And then there's like a prison camp one as well. I find this interesting. I hear a lot of stories. Most of the stories go along the line of, you know, why there's one female Smurf. But a lot of them look at this culture, this Smurf culture, and look at geopolitical things. You know, this is a socialist encampment or communist or whatever. I find it really fascinating. It's part of why I just absolutely love this entire collection through the decades. And let's talk about number 1. So remember, this all starts much before 1958 with Johann and Peewit. And then in 1958, they introduced the Smurfs, and then they have the flute with the 6 holes. And then production begins by Spirou and Dupuis itself. Dupuis was the publisher, and they're going to create these first era figures. Almost impossible to find. I don't suspect anybody's going to find them here in the United States. But if you do see very old looking figures, Johann and Peewit, and there's a few other Smurf figures in here as well. But it's going to be actually figures that are very, very similar to the figures you see Schleich make, but they're made before that, and you might see Dupuis as the printing on it. They're not made out of PVC, they're actually latex, and they're a little bit more bendable as well. They look very, very different, but they're produced all the way up until Schleich starts producing them in the mid-60s. And I would love to have these in my collection, so if you ever find them, make sure you contact me. Speaking of, if you have any collections out there that you're interested in selling, check my email down below, and I'd love to see it. Don't forget to come on over and join us on dibdit.com. It is a wonderful place. Thank you for stopping by, and I can't wait to see you next time.